Welcome to Don't Chuck It Up, the podcast where we help students and families navigate the wild journey of the college search and applying to colleges without breaking a sweat. I'm your host, Chuck, and today we are talking with one of my favorite people in the admissions world, Nathan Ament. Welcome to the show, Nathan. How are you doing?
I'm great, and I'm really happy to be here.
I'm excited because I got to be on your podcast a couple of times, so I thought it was only fair that you can come and be on mine,
Right. And you just had Teej too, right? You couldn't handle both of us at the same time. I get it. I understand.
Well, it would be a lot. I mean, in all honesty, I've known both of you for so long, it would be a lot to have all three of us on one episode. So yeah. Well, Nathan, why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself so that people know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, happy to. Currently the vice president of enrollment at Knox College, the banner right behind me, if you're watching this on YouTube. Been here about a year and a half, and I've been in enrollment management for 23 years. Did not start out in admissions like everybody else, right? Like I always joke around, you don't go to college and major in admissions. You kind of stumble upon it. But I actually majored in music education, which is something you and I have in common, right? We were both music ed people.
Yep.
And I went to Augustana College and did a band director gig for a year right out of school, and then stumbled into admissions from my good friend Megan Cooley, who's been on our podcast a couple times. You should have on yours, by the way. And she said, "Hey, somebody just quit here in the admissions office. I know you're looking for a job. Would you like to come back and just, tell kids where to go to college and help them get to Augustana while you look for a band director job?" And then 23 years later, here I am. So I've been at 7 different institutions, pretty much all of them in the upper Midwest. You and I, of course, got to know each other at our time at Lawrence University. But I've also worked on the vendor side. I did a vendor sabbatical at a couple of different companies in ed tech and marketing. Before I was at Knox, I was down south for our southern sabbatical. At Loyola University, New Orleans, where I was the vice president for enrollment. So it's great to be back here. We love the Midwest, love Knox College, really actually like Western Illinois and the prairies that are out here. But we get up to Appleton. You and I were just talking a little bit before we hit the record button, because my oldest son just finished his first term at Lawrence University, which has just come full circle, right, Chuck?
Yeah, that was a delightful surprise when your family announced last year that your son would be returning to the great city of Appleton so that he could attend my alma mater, Lawrence University. So yes, I was very excited to see that. And for those of you who are not aware, I live no more than about 15 minutes from the Lawrence University campus. So I get to go down and enjoy the campus when I have a moment or if I'm in the downtown area. So yeah, and I was actually on the hiring committee that helped hire Nathan when he was applying for a job to Lawrence University.
I forgot that, Chuck. Holy cow, that's a deep cut.
So although I've got the gray, you don't have, as much gray as I have yet. So yeah, it's starting to
a little bit on the side. Yeah.
I'm excited to have you on because you're currently in the profession. So I think people might need a little bit of explanation as to what the heck is the vice president of enrollment. That sounds so fancy. So what do you do in that role?
Basically oversee the offices of admissions and financial aid. Like at the end of the day, it's a very traditional role here at Knox, especially because we're a traditional campus, right? We're a 4-year residential institution, very similar to Lawrence University. And we don't have graduate programs. We don't have online programs or whatever else. Positions like this at other institutions can accompany or have a lot of things under the umbrella and in the portfolio. You could have communications office. You could have, you could oversee online enrollment, graduate school enrollment. I did both of those for a time when I was in my position at Loyola.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's to set strategy. It's to work with the big vendors to manage those type of contracts. It's to be basically the chief enrollment officer for the college. Now, here at Knox, I don't have retention, or I don't really work with the continuing students that much, other than with student financial services or financial aid. But primarily, I would say most of my responsibility is built around recruitment. How can we get our name out there more? How can we streamline our admissions processes? And then managing pretty large budget and a pretty large staff to make sure that this all works, right?
Yep.
And that we can be innovative and kind of face all these headwinds that are coming our way in the form of, you know, demographic slides, in the form of FAFSA challenges, and obviously families, you know, affordability concerns as well. So kind of doing all that, but primarily a figurehead sits on a president's cabinet, right? Like here it's called senior staff, right?
Right.
Interacts with the board of trustees, basically represents, you know, a vice president represents kind of each of the different areas on a college campus on behalf of the president, because the president can't necessarily do all of those things. So basically acts as, you know, as an arm of the president's office to oversee specific areas, whether it's enrollment, whether it's student affairs, whether it's administration,
Mhm.
facilities, things like that. So
I think the other big challenge as a vice president of enrollment is that you have to make sure that you don't over enroll the college or under enroll the college. So I think people don't understand that there is a very detailed science, and sometimes not a science, to figuring out how many kids you can get in to make sure that you're filling all the seats. And I've talked on previous episodes about institutional priorities and things like that. And I think it's really awesome that you're able to take all those things into consideration and make sure that Knox brings in the class, whether that's new first year students, transfers, internationals, whatever it may be, to make sure that, you know, all the seats are filled and the residence halls are good and not overfull, because then the director of residence life comes after you. But it's a challenge that way. So are you still actually reading any applications as the VP, or is that something that's more handled by your staff?
that's a great question. I don't read any of the applications like on the daily, if that makes sense. Like I don't
Right.
carry a recruitment territory. I don't have specific students that I work with, mainly because I wouldn't have time. Like in all the things that I have to deal with, you know, just at the end of the day, then student follow up would be, unfortunately, would be pushed down the list. So
Right.
we have that divided up here. But I do co-chair the admissions committee with our assistant vice president of admissions. And so any student that's on the border from an admissions standpoint, I do read their applications and we meet once a week to review those. And, you know, basically folks that are kind of on the edge, whether we want to, you know, request a 7th semester transcript and see how they're doing with their senior grades or whatever it is. I'm the one that's making that decision along with my AVP of admissions.
Now, the perception out there is that is a committee that reviews a lot of people. I think there's this thing that, you know,
Mm,
the applicant sits around and all the big wigs sit and they go, "Oh, we're gonna go through every file like you see on the movies and you know do a
yeah.
thumbs down or a thumbs up in the old Roman way, something like that." Is your committee seeing a large percentage of those applicants, or is it a rather small percentage of your app?
It's a fairly small percentage. Usually it's just because the territory manager who does the first read of the application just wants another set of eyes, right? And especially given the pandemic and these students
Mhm.
that are still like, I think the seniors right now are 7th graders, right? Or, you know, when the world shut down in the spring of 2020. So just looking at like, oh my gosh, like there are some D's on this transcript, or there are maybe they did fail, but they took a summer course or whatever it is. So just kind of looking at a second set of eyes, or having a second set of eyes, taking a look at that to say like, okay, I think we're going to be okay. Looks like there's an upward trend, or something happened, right? Something happened in their life,
Mhm.
and maybe there's a downward trend, like maybe a family member passed away, or maybe there was a move or something else. And so we want, let's take another look at, you know, maybe 7th semester and see how they're doing their senior year, and then go from there. But yeah, it's not this. I mean, it was when you and I were Lawrence. I'll date us here, right? Like we would sit
Mhm.
around with paper applications. I remember taking paper applications home to read and being threatened within an inch of our life that we couldn't lose those because they were not. You know, I mean, we Lee Hannigan. There's a deep cut.
Yep.
She don't take those home, but now it's all done within a database, right? It's all done with the CRM. Most of the world in admissions uses Slate, so that's all done electronically. But it's all kind of set up like an old school admissions office. I remember when I was at Augustana in my first year, we had just a file room, and we just had all these file cabinets, and then there was all these different bins where like these were the ones that were ready to be read. These were the ones that had like, that maybe needed a couple, had a missing pieces of information or whatever else. Like that's still set up kind of in a virtual way. Yep. Within the database. And so we can kind of move students electronically from bin to bin and review them that way, which is nice.
Yeah, to total flashback, when I was a student in college, that was one of my early student jobs. Was I was a runner that basically, an admissions counselor would say, all right, I need 20 files to read, go run up to the third floor and grab the 30, because each of the counselors had a drawer basically of physical files. And I had to go and grab 20, and the 20 that they were done with, I had to go file away. But yeah, now almost everything is done virtually. I run into very few colleges nowadays that still do paper. There are some, very few and far between, but it's now all virtual in that aspect. But yeah, times have definitely changed with that. I do remember almost knocking over a cup of coffee in your office and getting an application almost wet, and us just about screaming our heads off like, no!
Don't do it. Yeah, that was the soprano that we wanted, right? Because I was director of conservatory admissions there, so like we were really in the thick of it. I remember, but
yeah. Admissions has drastically changed. So, would I be correct in saying that Knox likes to say yes to students who are applying to Knox? Is that a goal that you're really trying to say yes to students?
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I were talking before you hit that record button. You're talking about schools that maybe want to, change how they do admissions, right? They want to go maybe to a rolling admissions where you basically just kind of review applications as they come in versus deadline admissions where you like, that's how we were at Lawrence, where we'd have those stacks of applications and like everybody would apply by January 15th or whatever. And then you'd review them all as a group, and then you'd push out the ones that you wanted to admit at that point. There are very few institutions that are doing it that way in true form, and it's mainly the very selectives. Right now, I would say we're in this weird, vague chapter where there's institutions, and Knox is one of them, that publishes deadlines and say you have to get your application in by this early action deadline, or you have to get it in by this regular decision deadline, so that you'll be considered for admission. And then we notify you, whenever. But in reality, we're really trying to do no less than a 2-week turnaround on these decisions. So if somebody actually gives us the full application, we have everything that we need, then we will try to get them an admissions decision within 2 weeks, because we know that attention spans are very short with these students these days, and they can deliver that information electronically, right? They all log into their application portal and they can see that electronically, and know when they're getting in. Along with scholarship information. You're not just sending them an admissions decision, you're also sending them, merit-based scholarship information before they file the FAFSA or do any of the need-based things. So,
yeah, I think a lot of parents and students don't understand that whole process, because when you see it in the movies, it seems a lot more, they're envisioning a 70-year-old man with a deny stamp sitting there, oh, deny. And I think students and parents need to realize that there are colleges like Knox and many others that are in the mission to say yes and say, yes, we actually want to have you as a student. We're excited to have you. No, you don't have to wait all the way until April to hear from us. You can hear from us really quickly if you get everything in. Those deadlines are out there, though, because I think if colleges didn't have some type of a deadline, teenagers would kick the can down the road until the very last minute.
It would be pandemonium, Chuck. Yeah. Yeah, it would all, because teenagers procrastinate. Like every teenager loves to procrastinate. And even the type A, like straight A students or whatever else, like they all love to procrastinate because there's so much going on in their lives. And that's how they just basically work these days. And you're right. So that's why we basically do it, because students, they will respond to deadlines. And so that's why we put these deadlines in place, and we market to them in a crazy fashion, probably too much, but we market to them and inundate them with emails, text messages, whatever social media has, whatever it is, to get them to adhere to these deadlines so they'll actually put in an application.
Yeah, and students and parents need to be aware that there are some colleges out there that are hardcore about their deadlines. Like if not
Right.
everyone's in by that time, you are going to get kicked to another timeline, or you may even be automatically denied. But the vast majority of colleges, I would say 85% of colleges, if you don't get everything in by the deadline, you probably have a few days, maybe even a week to get the last pieces in, and the college is still going to be okay with you. You're not going to be, oh, I have a lower chance of admission if stuff got in a little bit later. We know that stuff happens. Teachers are busy. High school counselors are busy. It's hard to get stuff out to the colleges super fast or on time because, it happens. But try and get it in before the deadline. I encourage my students to submit their stuff at least 2 weeks ahead of the deadline. So then you can set it, forget it, and move on with the rest of your life. But you're right. I'm currently struggling with students who have January deadlines who are like, can I just do them over the winter break? And I'm going, no, you need to get them done before the winter break so that everything can happen while you are on winter break and colleges can start reviewing them and get everything together. But yeah, headache.
Yeah. And also just knowing and this is why I'm sure you're counseling your students this way, but I'll put the plea out there is that just knowing what each school requires, because it's slightly different, right? And, starting first and foremost, create that Common App account, like make sure that you have your passwords and all that other stuff, and then go in there and see which ones, because every school, we all like to be just a little bit different. And like, maybe this one requires an essay, but not a letter of recommendation, or maybe this one actually needs something for this specific out-of-state scholarship or whatever it is. So just knowing, because I have a couple of family members or friends of family or whatever else that have kids that are seniors right now, and say, go find the things or the things that are not under your control, where you need a letter of rec or you need the school counselor to submit a transcript or whatever it is. Like, those are the things you cannot wait until the end. You can push submit on your application at 11:59 p.m. and be fine. But it's these other supporting documents that, you have to go out, and you can't expect a teacher or a school counselor to adhere to your procrastination schedule.
I 100% agree with everything you just said, and making sure students are talking to those people earlier rather than trying to get a hold of your high school counselor on a Sunday, because that's not going to happen. And
Nope.
there's a big difference in applications that require documents and applications that recommend documents. And
Yep.
that can be something that screws students up a little bit because they're going to say, oh, it says I need 3 recommendations. I said, no, it says you can submit 3 recommendations, but they only require 1. So there's a difference in nuance there as far as recommend versus required. I talked about that in a previous episode as to how to get ready to apply. But I also would love to hear, you just went through this experience from a different standpoint as a parent. So now you've seen it from literally both sides. You and I have working in the sausage factory for a long time. We know how the sausage is made and how decisions in the admissions process. But now you got to see it from the other side. So were there things that surprised you, shocked you, made you excited about being a parent of a student going through this process?
What really probably shocked me the most was the lack of information that colleges were sending to parents. Right. And I was occasionally getting copied on information, right? Like emails, even from missing documents, or, Noah is a music student. So we had an extra layer of things at these different schools for either a required audition for his degree or a required audition for the scholarship or whatever it was. But just not sending us information and not cluing us in. And then just the college basically saying, well, now your kid's going to be an adult, so they're responsible for everything and they need to be on top of all this. And in 2024, that is not the case. And these pandemic families that were all together, when they were a 7th grader and an 8th grader and then starting high school, they depended on each other and they're closer than they were before. And these parents are still, we're even seeing it with the continuing students here on campus, like they're active in their lives. Mom is getting a FaceTime from a college-age daughter, after class, like just checking in and connecting. And they're not saying like, oh, now you've left and now you're a completely independent adult.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not the case. So it really made me take a second look at all our parent communications. We use a firm called Campus ESP that provides a newsletter that comes out very regularly, has a parent portal. I borrowed a couple of ideas from some other institutions. We started doing parent only events in our regions this year where we just invited parents to like chat with the admissions counselor. We invited a couple of alums, and just did these in a couple of our key markets, because what we're finding is the students are actually harder to schedule than the parents, right? So the students have all, after school practices, rehearsals, whatever it is, the parents can kind of figure out their lives enough that they could come and they could ask all their burning questions and not embarrass Susie.
Yes.
Right. Because they're asking all these stupid, quote unquote, questions. And then they're more informed, because what needs to happen is parents continue to be the number one influencer, even over the school counselor or an independent counselor. And
Right.
so when the time comes, when it is, 10:59 p.m. or whatever, who's going to be there? It's going to be the parent, and they need to be prepared with answers. So I really think that's what influenced it the most. And Chuck, it was through every part of the process, from the application process through the decision process. Then, oh my gosh, the summer, right? The summer between like, okay, now we've deposited, and what do we need? How many immunization forms, and what portals now do we need to get into, and all this other stuff, and all the, the enrolling documents that we need to do, residence hall applications, your former life, right? I mean,
Yep.
all those type of things that really, the parent needed to be there every step of the way, and not just make this assumption that like, oh, your kid's now an adult and good luck, they're going to handle it on their own, because they're not.
I think that's an awesome observation. I think it is a switch, because we as Generation X were, raised on our own, like, oh, figure it out. Your parents will check in with you whenever you get home. We didn't have parents calling us, and like I didn't have a cell phone until I was in middle of my college experience. So I didn't have my parents couldn't check in. I had a, prepaid phone card that I had to use in my residence hall room to call home at a certain time
Right.
after 8 p.m. because the minutes were cheaper. And now we have this very different viewpoint, but I think a lot of colleges are still operating under this is just the student's role. Parents will get to you usually around financial aid time. I'm like, okay, now we're going to talk to the parents because we're talking money. But I think a lot of colleges and parents just need to be aware that colleges are not going to be directly sending messages out to parents, which is ironic, because when the student applies, they are expected to put on their parents' contact information. So email, phone, what have you. So the colleges have it. They're just typically not using it until, I would say, closer to financial aid time and the final decision time, where you get invited to the admitted student events or the open houses or whatever's going on. And then colleges go, hey, parents, we should probably talk to you too. And
Right.
something that needs to change. So
Mm-hmm.
and obviously places like Knox, which is a part of the colleges that changed lives, reach out a whole lot more than many colleges do. Many colleges don't have the smaller student to faculty ratio or student to staff ratio that a place like Knox would have, where you can provide that type of support. So bigger schools are going to have less communication. Some schools do really well, and they have a parent website and a parent portal, things like that, but that is not the norm. That is the exception to the rule out there in the college land. So are there any tips or advice that you would give as Mr. VP of Enrollment to current students and parents who are either starting the college search process or going through it right now?
I think my number one is just try not to buy into the hype that like you're not going to get into college, right? Like, I mean, there are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, and, less than 50 of them are actually selected. Everybody has a spot, right? There's plenty of spots available. All of them give great educations. If they didn't, they wouldn't be accredited, right? They wouldn't be able to be in existence. All of them will just provide wonderful college experiences, right? Depending on the campus, depending on the location, whatever it is, all varying levels, but you will find a place to go. And you will hopefully find a place that's affordable. There are plenty of colleges that have scholarships available, that have financial aid available. And it behooves you as a family to make sure that you are looking at all of your options. But holy cow, is it confusing. Like that's the one thing that I would recommend, like either lean into your admissions counselor at one of your colleges, lean into an independent counselor such as yourself, Chuck, or lean into a school counselor if you have that relationship and say like, here's all my financial aid awards. How do we make sense of this, right? Like what is a federal direct loan? What does that mean? What is a Parent Plus loan? Why does my balance say zero? Well, because you probably packaged a Parent Plus loan there, right? So, how much can I earn in work study? You know, things along those lines. Can I get campus employment even though I don't qualify for federal work study? Like, how does that work? Can I still get a job on campus? So, you know, you really do need an interpreter kind of along the way, which is unfortunate because it shouldn't be that confusing. Like it should be pretty straight ahead, but our industry definitely likes to make it more confusing than it should be. And that's the one thing I just thought would have gotten better by this point, but it really seems to have gotten worse. Which sucks.
Gotten worse. Well, and that's where I really bring it up to students and parents is that someone like myself, as you mentioned, having worked in admissions and financial aid areas, I can look at financial aid awards and say, oh, you don't want to take this because it's giving you, 50% of your costs is covered in a Parent Plus loan. Like that's not smart. So before you sign on the dotted line, I'm kind of like a real estate agent. I help families find their new home for their kids, so to speak, just like a real estate agent would walk you through housing offers that you've made and what's been accepted and what are all the paperworks and the T's that need to be crossed and the I's that need to be dotted. I can do the same thing for students and families reviewing those financial aid awards, whether you've been a client of mine for, 3-4 years, or you just want to have a session and go through it. I want students and families to make intelligent, educated decisions on what their next step is and not just sign on the dotted line at the first shiny object that comes across their desk. Like, oh, we got some money, we should say yes. Like, no, hold on. That might not be the best move yet. I've had people call me, I would say too late. Like they'll call me, April 20th saying, we don't know how we can afford this place. I said, well, I don't know how you can afford it either. I think you applied to a college that isn't a great financial fit for you. And now we may need to figure out plan B, C, or D. But I think
well, and to that point, sorry to interrupt you, but to that point, like to continue with the real estate metaphor, the one thing that's missing is that we don't get pre-qualified. Like you get pre-qualified for a mortgage and you would at least know what your price range is for your home purchase. We don't really do that for admissions. Like we kind of have a net price calculator and we kind of have students that maybe would go onto there, but let's be honest, the net price calculators are never actually correct and they're hard to find on a website and whatever else. So I always, same thing, right? Like don't apply to these colleges where one, you're probably, if you get in, great, but you're not going to get a scholarship. So basically it's like the worst of both worlds. Like it's so exciting that you got in, but like you can't afford it. So why even look at it in the first place? Why even take a look at a home that's over $1 million when your range only goes up to 250,000 or whatever it is, right? Like that's the tough part, I think, with this, because students get so excited.
Yes. And that it impacts different colleges different ways. So out of state publics are a big price tag, and many publics do not have a robust scholarship or financial aid award to bring that down to the cost of in-state. Parents, I think, oh yeah, well, we'll just get a bunch of aid and we can bring it down to the cost of in-state. Not many publics have the capability of doing that. On the flip side, there are many privates like Knox that have a bigger price tag, but that is not actually what you end up paying usually. So you have to be careful with private universities because some of them, the price tag is pretty close to what you're going to pay. Like it is a hyper-selective college. They don't offer any scholarships whatsoever. So 80,000 is 80,000. Like it's not going to move unless you are very low income or moderately low income, and there's going to be some other financial aid available to you, that 80,000 price tag is not going to budge. Where there's hundreds, possibly thousands of private colleges that do offer robust merit scholarships, and you don't have to be the 4.036 ACT. You can, but there's a lot of colleges that offer scholarships down to a 3.0 and sometimes even below a 3.0 that can make that private college as affordable, if not even cheaper, than a public institution in your home state.
Yeah, I agree. I can't reiterate enough, though, the public out-of-state flagships. I'm really seeing the last couple of years where like students are just kind of going to the edges, right? Either
Yep.
they're looking at a really small school like Knox or Lawrence or whatever else, or they're looking at like Iowa, or they're looking at Alabama, or they're looking at all these other places. And from a price point perspective, other than a couple of the Ivy Leagues, like the out-of-state flagship is
Yeah.
the most expensive option you can get, and they don't realize it because they're thinking, oh, it's like University of Illinois or it's like University of Wisconsin or whatever it is. That's a public institution. Like, no, like that they're charging private institution comprehensive fees.
Yep.
And they have application overload, like applications for days. So they're actually being very selective with their admissions processes, or they're not even getting all their reviewing their applications, right? And so then families will spend a whole lot of money at these institutions, and it's just crazy. So if you can't afford it, like if you know you can't do like put them in the same category as like a selective private institution, like from a price point perspective, it's almost the same.
Right. Well, and the other thing that a lot of families and students don't think about is what is the end result, the graduation rate, because many of the larger public institutions are telling their students hope for 4, plan for 5. So you should hope to graduate in 4 years if you get all your ducks in a row and everything works well, but you may need 5 years and sometimes even 6 years. That's why the national reported graduation statistics are on the 6-year mark, because for many institutions, it is very difficult to graduate in 4. Whereas at a private institution, there's a much higher shot that you were going to be graduating within 4 years. So that might actually be a better bang for your buck to find a private school that offers lots of scholarships, so that it is the price point for you ends up being like attending a public in-state institution, but you're going to have a better shot at graduating in 4 years rather than dragging it on and on and on ad nauseum. So,
yep. Couldn't agree
any
more.
tips or advice you'd love to give our listeners from either a parent perspective or as a VP of enrollment?
I think the one other thing that really, from my perspective as going through this as a parent, is that every family does have their own story, right? As admissions professionals, we kind of get desensitized to that, right? We just basically are like, okay, it's another year. These questions are always the same. This is the type of student or whatever else. It really is a family with their kid, and they want the best for their student, and they want the best place to go, and that what we do here does actually matter. And we have an advantage at a school like Knox where, we can, like you said earlier, we can hold their hand a little bit more. But that's why I like being at a school like Knox, because we can do that, right? And that's important to me, and it's important to create systems and processes and things like that where we encourage that, and we're not just trying to get them for their net tuition revenue or all those awesome enrollment terms that we love to throw around. Like, this is a place where they're going to go, and the little things do matter. Proper signage matters when you show up to a college visit. Like, just clear communication about, when you're going to move your kid in, how does that work? And clear communication about signing up for whatever it is, like in a visit or whatever. Like, all of that really does matter for the family's experience.
Yeah, and that's I love all of that advice, because parents do need to be aware of all of those things as they're going through this process. And parents need to understand that there really isn't a dumb question. If you have a question that might be due to lack of communication or miscommunication, so reach out either to your high school counselor, someone like me, or directly to the admissions office. When Nathan and I were those admissions counselors, traveling all over the country, I enjoyed answering those questions because I'd rather have a parent understand it than be, confused through the process. Is like, okay, how does this work? Especially with like when we were both working in music recruitment, like that was a very different animal of how you have to go through that process. And I was like, I'd rather have you be fully informed than be confused and miss something and not be happy afterwards.
And I'll do it one better. So what we've been working with for the last couple of months is our new AI recruiter, called KC for Knox College.
Nice.
But she handles a lot of this stuff, and it is amazing. Like, we've been listening to some of the initial conversations for the students that want to be kind of our test pilots on this. And students love it, right? Because you can get those initial questions answered at any time that you want. You can call into KC, and the AI technology is incredible through this company we're using called CollegeVine, and it's awesome. And that kind of gets some of these questions initially like answered, and then if there's something that you need that's very specific, then it immediately kicks you over to an admissions counselor, and it just creates better conversations at that point with the admissions counselor, which is awesome.
Yeah, and Knox College is one of the first in the nation to operate an AI admissions counselor to help answer those the 101 basic level questions that we as admissions counselors would answer 100 times a day, where it allows then admissions counselors to spend more time on those detailed questions or the more challenging questions that an AI person or an AI counselor basically are unable to answer for the students and families. So yeah, if anyone wants to explore an AI admissions counselor, go check out Knox College and see what's going on with Casey, the admissions counselor, because you'll discover AI in that way. Well, great. Before we wrap things up, Nathan, would you like to plug your podcast in case people want to hear more of you on a regular basis?
Yeah, I would say if you really want to hear, because I know your audience is a little bit different than ours, Chuck. Our podcast is called the Admissions Director's Lunchcast. I co-host it with my friend and your friend as well, Tej Matil. I like to give him a hard time all the time on the podcast. But we do this podcast for admissions directors. Specifically, we talk about an issue that faces our profession, and we have two guests on. One is a school counselor, somebody in your role, an independent counselor, and then we hear from an admissions director or an associate director on a college campus. We've been through 8 seasons, and we just had a meeting last week planning for season number 9, which will debut in the spring. And we like to have a good time. So if you really want to figure out how it's all made and how admissions works, take a listen to the admissions director's lunchcast, because we have a good time.
It's also a podcast that if you are not familiar with admissions language, you might be a little bit overwhelmed. But
lots of acronyms.
Lots of acronyms, lots of phrases that we use in the admissions recruitment area that most parents and students would be like, what the heck are they talking about? But yeah, welcome to a whole industry. But yeah, for parents and students that want to learn a little bit more about how the sausage is made, so to speak, check out the podcast with Nathan and Tej. I'm sure I will add that to the show notes, as well as, of course, check out Knox, one of my favorite small liberal arts colleges that I have visited. I've had a couple of my students go there. So a great institution located in Galesburg, Illinois. So Nathan, thanks for being on the podcast today. You're amazing, awesome. I'm excited for everything that you're doing in your personal and professional life and everything that's happening at Knox.
Thanks, Chuck. Happy to be here.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today, but fear not. We'll be back next week with more tips and tricks to help you conquer the college application process like a boss. Until then, remember, don't chuck it up.